Welcome to the Voices for Voices TV show and podcast. If you can do us a favor, please click like, share, subscribe, pass along this great content to friends, family, your network. We are trying to reach and help 3 billion people. And again, all those things we don't have to pay for. So we just tap the button and we'll be in great shape. So again, this is the Voices for Voices TV show and podcast. We are a 501c3 nonprofit charity organization. You can find all of the information about our organization, what we do, how we help by visiting voicesforvoices.org. Today, in this episode, we are going to be joined by a guest who resides on the other side of the world. She is from Orange, New South Wales, Australia. She is the founder of Bullyology, a workplace consultant, speaker, an educator, coach, and author. There's really nothing in the helping space that she hasn't touched. You've heard me talk about my dream and how those dreams have been made possible through a supportive culture with my mom and my dad at home in an earlier episode. And so dreaming and having a vision is important. And so our guest, her dream and vision is that organizations are prioritizing employee well-being, that education and awareness are affordable and accessible, both affordable and accessible. People at work are taking ownership of their personal and mental well-being. Workplace bullying is in decline. And then lastly, employers are empowered to be upstanders rather than harmful bystanders. So in our conversation, you're gonna see our guest, Jessica Hickman, the Upstander Leader, is gonna talk about her being a victim of workforce bullying over a 3-year period that happened when she saw firsthand what the bystander effect is and how that was implemented, unfortunately, in her position. One of her books, the first book, The Upstander Leader, is available to encourage leaders to help speak up and be part of that speak up culture instead of that bystander culture of we might see something happening, we don't want to be involved, so we're just going to continue moving on. And so Jessica is going to touch on all those aspects. You can find out more about our guest, Jessica Hickman, at jesshickman.com, JESSHICKMAN.com, and also at Bullyology.com. So like psychology, Bullyology, the ology in that, and that can be spelled BULLYOLOGY.com. You'll be able to find her first book, The Upstander Leader, How to Develop a Speak Up Culture, and then her second book that's also available on paperback as well as the e-version that's titled The Bullyologist, Breaking the Science on Bullying. So we want to invite you to take a seat and watch our conversation with Jessica, who speaks not only on her experience in Australia, but also across the world, where organizations and individuals are seeking out her help and her expertise, so much so that she was able to found the Upstander Leader Academy. So we'll take you to the conversation. Thank you again for joining this episode of the Voices for Voices TV show and podcast. On our episode today, we are excited to have our guest joining us from Orange, New South Wales, Australia. Her name is Jessica Hickman, and so she's going to be going through her story, her experiences, and how she has been called to help others regarding bullyology, what that is, what that means, among how that came about. So thanks for joining us today, Jessica.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's awesome to get your perspective because sometimes people think that a certain workplace or mental health issues only affect people in maybe a certain country, a certain area of the world. And what I'm learning is that's not the case. So can you maybe go into your experience, your story, and what your calling is and how you're helping people?
Yeah, great. So, look, I didn't start a business because I just woke up one day and thought, oh, I'm going to start a business called Bullyology and specialize in anti-bullying solutions. Like many people in the space of mental health, workplace culture, bullying, harassment, often it stems from a personal experience or lived experience. So as you can probably tell by my accent, although I live in Australia, I'm actually from the UK. I'm from Wales. And I came to Australia in 2013. I was just 23 years old, backpacking, and came for a 3-month career break. And I was very fortunate to be offered a role to stay in Australia. So, as you can imagine, this was an amazing opportunity for a young girl to carve out her career, start a new life. And obviously, as many people around the world know, Australia is beautiful. Beaches, scenery, culture, fantastic. So I was offered a job working in the construction industry on a large oil and gas project. So as you can imagine, this was very male dominated, which wasn't intimidating for me because my background in the UK was I was working as a manager for a construction company. I worked in councils. I did various roles where I worked in male dominated industries. And, you know, my family have got a construction business, so this wasn't foreign to me. But in that role, I quickly identified that there was a real issue with mental health in Australia, particularly workers. There's the fly-in, fly-out industries where workers were living away from home for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, you know, or even longer, away from friends and family and, you know, their kids. And that comes with a lot of social issues. People were isolated in camps, experiencing a lot of mental health. There was a lot of stigma around mental health, which often happens in male-dominated industries. People feel they can't speak up and ask for help. So I decided to use my experience from in the UK. I work for local council. I'm a youth worker. So I trained in, you know, anti-bullying, harassment, mental health, and realized that I needed to bring the nurturing environment into the current workplace. So look, I became quite successful, as in I was developing culture programs. People were starting to feel confident and safe to speak up, and things were going great. I was winning awards. I was in front of the Northern Territory Minister as Northern Territory Young Achiever of the Year. So look, on paper, things were great, and people were trusting me and asking for help, and I was able to signpost them to get that mental health support. But things weren't all hunky-dory behind the scenes. Unfortunately, 6 months in, I had a new manager who was a serial bully and had very different values to myself. So I'm kind, empathetic. You know, I want people to feel safe and nurtured to speak up. And he had a very different, let's say, I don't know if it's leadership or just style of human behavior, where he was very narcissistic, unkind, threatening, and believed that anyone experienced, whether it was physical, emotional, or mental health concerns, was a risk to the business. So our values clashed, and ultimately he was my boss, my manager. So I then became his target of bullying and harassment, and that was really hard to, you know, pinpoint and understand at the time. And that was really what started the journey of suffering bullying.
Yeah, and it's I'm glad you went in such detail because what you were experiencing and
doing a little bit of research prior to us talking, your bullying was a little bit more public, more out in the open per se, whereas sometimes it might not be. And can you maybe just talk
Oh,
about how just that
yeah.
aspect?
So look, like anything, bullying is often really hard to understand, and the definition of bullying, and there's many across the world, but bullying is repeated, intentional, health harming behavior. And the person has intent to humiliate, harm, cause emotional, physical, or psychological hurt to another. So if we look at repeated and intentional, that is often really interesting, because what my bully started to do was attack my character subtly. So accuse me of not, competently doing my work, undermining me in meetings, sniggering and laughing when I spoke in public, to even starting rumors that I was having interpersonal relationships with clients or colleagues. And in his mind, he didn't understand how a female could be so successful in a man's world.
Right.
So it was really interesting. There was a lot of, harassment-based comments, attacks on my gender, telling me women should be seen and not heard, and women are good for one thing. But he would really try to pass this off as banter, would laugh after it, and this became the social norm. So what happened over time was the bullying actually escalated, and to the point where one day he physically threw a folder, it hit me in the face. He would shout and swear and slam doors. The more successful I became, the more I won awards, the more people would come to me, the more it would anger him. And what was interesting in my story was that I actually reported this 32 times. I documented it, which I would advise to anyone experiencing bullying, harassment, or racism or toxic behavior to document it. Fact, also the feeling, but also any witnesses that were present, also who you reported it to. And what I started to see then was a repeat pattern where it escalated from subtle, threats about my job or competency to more attacks on my character, my appearance. And his intent was to, break me down, to make me feel incompetent, insecure, which, for a period of time started to really impact my physical, mental, and emotional health.
Wow, that's it's just incredible the lengths that some people go to. I know how some of the the workplace numbers go, as far as, oh well, you'll be anonymous if you report this, and so sometimes culture is big on, yeah, we're doing something about it. We have this number out here. You can call it, text, email, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, nothing's done about it. And I think that could be a problem. Were you encountering that? It sounds like it was escalating almost each time that you were.
Absolutely. And look, I probably give a lot of different advice, and I stayed with my organization and workplace 3 years too long. I should have left after it happened for a couple of months and gone, 1 minute, this isn't okay. After I reported it a few times, got told to toughen up. It was the industry. Oh, it will stop. We'll move you seat. They even had to move him to another state, which was 4 hours on a flight. And he still managed to, hack my emails, micromanage, and then start to slowly come back into the office, which it took me collapsing at work and ending up in a hospital bed from burnout, stress, fatigue, and overwhelm for me to actually understand the weight of a toxic culture. So like I mentioned, I documented it and diaried what was happening. And I had some mental health symptoms early on, sleepless nights, vomiting before work, later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And, I would put on a brave face every day, come to work, but my body was heightened. I was stressed. It was that fight, flight, or even freeze. And at different periods of time, I had all of those symptoms. And what I would do is come home from work physically and mentally and emotionally burnt out, that I would have to sleep all weekend. Or sometimes I would drink a bottle of wine just to, numb the pain. So there's all these symptoms and signs that not a lot of people spoke about. And I reported it time and time again and actually begged for help. And I was actually on a visa. So it wasn't as easy for me to simply walk away and tell the company, you know, to stick it. I was, I loved the job I was doing. I was helping people. And I also just started a new life, was in a new relationship, you know, living in a beautiful home. And I, in my mind, was like, I will not let you push me out of a company for doing a good job, let alone a country. But the psychological, emotional, and physical issues stacked up until I burnt out and collapsed. So to answer your question, Justin, I often say to people, if the company doesn't value you, try to walk away. Because I see time and time again, people stay in jobs with false promises, and they end up being, you know, so damaged, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder, or, you know, physically burnt out, confidence shattered, that they then are unable to return to work again. So if I could go back and tell my younger self, you know, I would say run. But I'm so proud of myself for sustaining that and doing the work I do. And it's a bit crazy, but I also say, like, would I change anything? Probably not, because that allowed me to have a deeper perspective. And it was laying in that hospital bed that I thought, right, I'm going to use this experience as a gift, because it was the only option, to learn about bullying and harassment and see how I can actually create sustainable change by educating people at the root, or proactive conversations, so people don't have to end up in the reactive in a hospital bed like myself. Or the other side of the coin is business leaders not understanding what to do about bullying, ending up hurting people unintentionally, or, you know, damaging reputation or business success. And I realized that a lot of people, my colleagues who turned a blind eye, looked the other way, they're not bad people. We just didn't have the skills, tools, competency and training to know how to get help. And for me, that was outside of the organization. That was leaving, learning, and getting psychological help to overcome it. And sometimes it could be going, like in Australia, the Fair Work Commission or WorkSafe, and looking in your local area. And sometimes it's free legal advice, which I also got, to understand what are my options, and how can I leave and protect myself if they're not valuing me. Because I think what we forget in this day and age is employment is an equal game, right? So if people aren't valuing you, you actually have the opportunity to leave. But I know that's not as easy as just going, yeah, leave, because people have families and livelihoods, and like in the economy we're in now, it's really hard just to say leave. But slowly start to think about options for change, because ultimately, if you're so damaged you can never return to work, that's actually counterproductive as well. So it's really hard. There's not a one solution, which is why bullying and harassment is so prevalent and such an issue across the world, because it's so difficult to identify and know what to do often.
Yeah, and there's so many forms of it too. You imagine it's more complex. It's not something that is easily to identify. I think in the general public, they might think it is like, oh, okay, I know what bullying is. But until I think they've gone through it, they may find that there are different ways of being bullying. It's not always the one size fits all. And I think that's what's important for you, as you're sharing, is to talk about all those different areas. It wasn't just the words, it was physically throwing something, it was basically virtual.
And look, what we're seeing now in a work from home post-pandemic world is the fact that there's those micromanaging via email, publicly humiliating people via Zoom, excluding people from team meetings, publicly berating people. And sometimes they can feel really subtle, but if they are ongoing and repeated, it can be perceived as bullying. And then we look at, sexual harassment, Me Too, and even Black Lives Matter, the racism and injustice. And what I realized throughout my work was we have a lot of complexities around issues, and rather than me just accept that that was the status quo, in my new book I decided to establish a way forward, and that was often identifying some of the issues but actually being proactive to create change, to have the hard conversations, to bring these up before they become reactive, and ultimately create what I call the Upstander movement. And that starts with education, not just awareness, but ultimately showing people a roadmap how to be proactive rather than reactive.
And I think that's so important. You're finding, and you've found strategies and ways to be proactive, to put yourself first, to make sure that being healthy. Because if you go to work and you're not healthy yourself, then that in itself is not healthy. But then the lifespan then starts to come in question of, okay, as enough of these unfortunate negative bullying experiences come up over time, they take aware. And especially, it's not just the mental side, it's physically as well. And I understand in a way, earlier in my career, I had gone through what now, as we're talking, what I guess I would now classify a form of bullying. And I would come home and I would sleep, go to sleep early, and I would wake up just a mess. And then, like I said, on the weekends, sometimes it was just trying to regroup and feel like I had enough energy, and I couldn't get on top of it. And to know that being proactive of saying, okay, being with the job market being how it is at any given time, that there are things to start putting yourself first. Can you talk maybe about maybe a couple of the highlights that we haven't talked about yet, that in your book and in your academy, that people could learn more about?
Yeah, sure. Look, this is quite, to go quite deep. I just want to establish what you've mentioned there, because bullying impacts not just your happiness at work, but your relationships, your self-worth, your self-love, how you have, relationships with your kids or your partner or your family, because, you're really suffering. And I would say, I was going to say, I like to make the connection to domestic violence, but that's the wrong word. I need to make the connection to domestic violence, because ultimately, Justin, if someone comes to you and shares, I'm experiencing domestic or family violence at home, we ultimately, as a society, tend to go, right, we call the police, we go to support services, we refer the person onto psychological support, emotional support, family support. But ultimately, at the core, we understand that that is a long journey to recovery. But when we think about workplace violence, bullying, harassment, racism, discrimination, and the list goes on, we tell the person to move seat, toughen up, it's the industry, or just get another job, suck it up, or just ignore them. But ultimately, we spend as much time, if not more, of our lives at home than we do at home. So to tell people just to get on with it is actually counterproductive and doesn't work. So what I'm trying to do is really highlight the fact that workplace violence is so detrimental that it can actually damage people long term. The scars are invisible and they take a long time to heal, if they ever do heal. So when I share a keynote or a workshop, the common question I always get asked is, when will I heal? You look great. How do I get from A to B? And the answer to that is, it's still a journey for me. Sometimes when I share a keynote, I can break out in a rash on my neck because the body remembers the trauma. And, the scars are invisible, and sometimes you can have dreams at night, or, people have a lot of different symptoms, or they hear the person's name and they go into a hyper state, feel aroused, mentally, physically, or faint or pass out. So it's interesting that we actually need to identify that. So we know what the problem is, but what I couldn't understand or work out at first, okay, what is the solution? And I looked at my colleagues in workplace and would feel really upset and angered and different emotions around how could they allow me to be publicly berated? How could other managers just turn a blind eye to when he was sniggering under his breath or calling me names or, belittling me or attacking my competency or appearance? And I realized there's this issue globally with something called the bystander effect. And it actually came about from a young lady called Kitty Genovese that got brutally attacked in New York City. So I'll encourage anyone listening to this to look into Kitty's story because we don't have time to go into the detail. But really from that, scientists realized that people actually stand by and become bystanders and witness something or heard something quite horrific when this woman was attacked and murdered. And they wanted to understand why. And what they really established from the bystander effect theory was, as human beings, our natural instinct and desire is when things are tough or challenging, we tend to go diffuse responsibility or go not my issue, not my problem. Particularly in organizations when we look at the highest paid person in the room. So if the CEO is the bully, that's the culture we keep. Or if a colleague makes a sexual remark or a racist remark, we tend to look at the highest paid person. What happens if they laugh at the joke or they pretend they don't hear it or say things like minded, oh, you two just stop, moving on, and just dismiss the weight of that comment or the hurt or pain? That's the cultural norm. So I realized the bystander effect was actually the pandemic or the issue within my organization. And good people became bystanders because they didn't know what to do, or it became the cultural norm. So in my work, I like to shift the pendulum. And I thought about the concept of the theory, and I call it the upstander effect. What happens if we're proactive and train people about what to do at the source of these comments, how to challenge them, how to report them, how to let people know they're not okay? How does the upstander effect shift culture? So I created a methodology, which is in my book, and I realized that, okay, in a movement era of, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, in Australia, we've got something called the March for Justice, and, racism, sexism, and all of the things that people are experiencing. What about if we train people to be upstanders? How can we create sustainable change? And I came up with what I call my 5 L's, which are my 5 L's to being an upstander, which are look, listen, learn, lead, and love, which is a whole other one, about how we can train people to be proactive and create change. And that ultimately, I've worked across the world in organizations and industries, from prisons and really male-dominated industries, and started to create space for people to stop, pause, and think. And one of the common things, Justin, that really resonates with a lot of people is, I said recently at a workshop in a prison, so have you got any family, daughters, wives? And yep, I got 3 daughters and a wife. I said, okay, cool. And you just give me that example of what is actually banter. But how would you feel if someone said that to your daughter? So you can imagine the emotional response. It was fists clenched down on the table. And he goes, well, no, I would, I'm not going to repeat what he said. And I said, well, what makes that acceptable for you to say to your colleague who's a female in the workplace? And then he stopped, and you can just see the light coming on, but no one has stopped to have these proactive conversations in many organizations and industries, which ultimately cause sustainable damage to lives and livelihoods. So look, there's so much I could unpack, but in a nutshell, I'm trying to train people to go from bystander to upstander, because not everyone is a bully. Even though the statistics globally say, a lot of people will experience bullying. In Australia in particular, almost half of our population will experience bullying at least once in their working lives or lives. So, that's every second person. So if it's not you experiencing it, it's your son, your daughter, your wife, your aunt, someone you care and love about, your neighbor. And we don't tend to have these conversations until someone's suffering and we just don't know what to do. So I'm trying to be proactive and create space so people have the full toolkit so they know what to do, just like domestic violence. we have a structure in place to save lives.
Wow. So how does it make you feel now with what the work that you're doing versus if you're taking the bullying part out of your previous employment, that might have been, I know for myself earlier in my career, titles and how much I was being paid, that mattered more to me, versus now tapping into more that empathetic, that emotional side of, okay, it might take a while for money for certain areas to come in, and it might be a lot of work up front, but it makes me feel really good, and I'm actually happier now than when I was before, and that's crazy. I'm wondering if you can like the before
That's
and
a really good
after.
point. Yeah, look, so my mission statement is to build a generation of upstanders, one person, one voice, and one action at a time. And ultimately, at my core, I want to end unnecessary human and workplace suffering. So when I wake up every day and I step out of bed, and I've just had a little baby, and people are saying, "Oh, you're still busy, you're doing this and that," and I say, if you find a passion or a purpose, you never work a day in your life. So to me, it doesn't feel like I'm going to work and writing my books and running workshops and talks, because my purpose and passion is bigger than myself. And again, a great question, because I'm 6 years into my business now. My brand is booming, business is booming. I'm earning great money, but more important to that, I never go and say that was the reason why, because like anything, when you build a business, and first 3 years of business, I think globally the stats are like people fail, and I never set out on this path to create a business. I fell into business by sharing my message, and again, still learning every day about how to navigate that change. But like you mentioned there, the first couple of years of business was building my message, building my brand, and doing a lot of charity stuff, which I still do, for free, and going into schools and community groups. But ultimately, there comes a time, and I think it's important to know your worth as well, where people want you because you've created something extraordinary and you have something to give to them. And I always say to people, you don't have to, do it for free, because what you're giving is value to an organization or a community. So value yourself equally. And I think that was a turning point in my success, because people will pay for what you have to say and your methodology or ideas, because ultimately it costs, or it saves them in compensation claims or business downturn, or people, psychologically, emotionally, or physically harmed, and their reputation being damaged. So I'm quite confident to say now, this is my costs. And if you want me in your organization, I'm happy to do so. And it's really interesting, Justin, that people said that wanted something for free a few years ago now have found the money, because they know the success, to get you back in. So I always say it's never a no, it's a not right now. And maybe you aren't the person they need right now, but if it's right, it'll come back.
Oh my gosh, that is so amazing how you summed that up. I'm in the with Voices for Voices in the probably a year of the first 12 months of being established and all those types of things on the legal side. I was doing things up until that as well, but I wasn't with the brand. And when I would go out to events and when I would go, I just wasn't all together. I was just doing bits and pieces. But in the last year, when I started to really hone in and focus, and really the show that we're on today, I say it was by, I don't say by happenstance. I was being interviewed at the station for another program, and the conversation came up about what else gets gets filmed and produced here. And if I wasn't in that position at that time, I wouldn't have found out about the opportunity. But I know exactly what you're talking about, of you do things and you start building the name, building the brand, and then it comes to a point where it's like, okay, here's my body of work. When I first started, I didn't have much. I had a lot of ideas and things I could talk about, but now it's okay. Well, here's some things that we've done and we're continuing to do, and like you mentioned, it's interesting how money tends to come out at times where in the past, I think it's just a shame that it takes that, because I guess everybody would be doing it if.
Oh, absolutely. And look, when your purpose, a purpose is a long game, and I'm not doing this the work I do, which is often, I can walk away from an organization, and I'm sure you do as well, where you hear people's lived experience day in, day out, day in, day out. So I never got into this for a money opportunity, but obviously you need to live, and you need to live a beautiful life. And yeah, it's about setting boundaries, and that goes for people in the organizations, bullies. It's boundaries and worth, and understanding your worth and your purpose. So yeah, if anyone is listening and looking, for me, it's playing the long game.
Yeah.
And I know that I'll be doing this work, and until I probably pass over at the end of time. But yeah, I feel like it's my soul work and purpose. And sometimes it's unfortunate that we have to face adversity to change direction. But it's about having that perspective and looking back at what at the time felt extremely painful, and I could not see light at the end of the tunnel, but understanding like light is always at the end of the tunnel, and building your toolkit and leaning on resources, getting mental health, psychological support, leaning on your support network, and ultimately understanding that the light will always come, even though it feels really dark at times.
Oh, that's lovely. To close out, we're about out of time. How can people learn more about you, find out about your book, your academy?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So look, if anyone listening to this wants to get in touch or follow my work, you can search. My website is jesshickman.com, and also bullyology.com. My new book, this side, is called The Upstander Leader: How to Develop a Speak Up Culture. So look, you can buy that on Amazon, any good bookstore, in the US or around the world. But ultimately, search my name, Jessica Hickman or Upstander, and you'll be able to find me. And from there, then, if anyone's interested in taking my online course, which I've recently launched to learn how to be an upstander in your workplace or community, it's Upstand Academy, or you can go via my jesshickman.com website. And yeah, this is my second book. The first book is called The Bullyologist: Breaking the Silence on Bullying, which tells my story in more detail and talks about school bullying and all of the things. And then my second book then is How to Be an Upstander and Create Change.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. The great work that you have done, and the fact that it's a calling. There's much more to come for you, and wish you continued success.
Watch this space. There's way more to come.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Justin.
You're welcome.
I hope you found that conversation to be helpful, eye-opening, empowering, inspiring, feeling all those emotions as you watched or listened to it. And so that's one of the things that we aim to do, is bring guests not only on a local basis, but if we're able to secure guests for our TV show and podcasts across the world, we want to bring those perspectives to you, because we feel that their voices are just as important as ours, and we want to help as many people as possible. So if we're closed-minded and only thinking about one certain area, that we might not be doing the best that we can. So by bringing a guest like Jessica to you, on the television, through your iPads, your MacBooks, through your earbuds on the subway or the train, or on your commute to and from work, or on a family vacation. So we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Voices for Voices TV show, and podcast. Again, you can find out more about Voices for Voices at voicesforvoices.org. And please like, share, reshare our show and podcast so we can reach as many people out there that could benefit from this. So until next time, again, I'm Justin Allen Hayes, founder and executive director of Voices for Voices, and we hope sincerely that you have a great day, and please be a voice for you or somebody in need.